Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We extend a very warm welcome to you all for the virtual CPE meeting today on standards on internal audit, keeping pace with reforms, organized by the Internal Audit Standards Board of ICAI and hosted by Chengalpattu District Branch of ICAI in Chennai. We are very thankful to the Chairman, Sri Sieh Charanjot Singh Nandaji, Vice Chairman, Sri Gyan Chandra Mishra ji, whole team of Internal Audit Standards Board, ICAI, in giving us a great opportunity in hosting this program today. Friends, internal audit is an independent management function which involves a continuous and critical appraisal of functioning of an entity with a view to suggest improvements thereto and add value and strengthen the overall governance mechanism of the entity, including the entity's strategic management and internal control system. The Internal Audit Standards Board of the Institute has issued standards on internal audit, which provide guidance to the members on all important aspects related to the internal audit, so that they adopt the best practices and processes carrying out the internal audit. These standards assist in providing confidence in the quality and consistency of the internal audit work conducted, and it also helps one in delivering internal audit services in an effective and efficient manner in establishing the requirements and benchmarks against which the performance of internal standards can be measured. Today, we have among us a very great eminent learned speakers and experts from the field of internal audit who will share their immense knowledge and expertise with us. I would like to thank Sri Sieh Nandaji, Central Council Member, ICAI, and Chairman, Internal Audit Standards Board, ICAI, Gyanji, Central Council Member, Vice Chairman, Internal Audit Board, ICAI, and the entire team of Internal Audit Standard Board for their persistent efforts in bringing professional updates to our doorstep. Thank you all. I would now request our CA Satyanarayana, Chairman of Chengalpattu District Branch of SIRC of ICAI, to present his opening remarks.
Thank you, Sieh. As the moderator of today's program, I'm Secretary of Chengalpattu District Branch. Very good evening to each and everyone present here today. As the Chairman of Chengalpattu District Branch of SIRC of ICAI, I welcome you all for the virtual teaching program on Standards on Internal Audit, keeping pace with reform. On behalf of the branch, I welcome Nandaji, Central Council Member ICAI and Chairman, Internal Audit Standard Board of ICAI, a legend by himself, and Gyan Mishra ji, Central Council Member, Vice Chairman, Internal Audit Standard Board, and our two eminent speakers for the day, Mr. Karma and C.A. Bharatdar, to be present among us today to share their immense knowledge on SA 210, Managing the Internal Audit Function, and SA 230, Objectives of Internal Audit, SA 220, Conducting Overall Internal Audit Planning, and SA 310, Planning the Internal Audit Agenda. These standards are pronouncements that form the basis for conducting all the internal audit. The Internal Audit Standard Board of SIRC that ICAI has been doing a wonderful job by conducting regular programs on various important topics. And once again, I thank the Internal Audit Standard Board for giving an opportunity to our branch for hosting this wonderful program. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Sri Satyaji. We welcome Sri Sieh Charanjot Singh Nandaji, Central Council Member. Presently, he is the Chairman, Internal Audit Standard Boards and Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, and is a Vice Chairman of the Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Committee of ICAI. Sri Nandaji is a true leader and a mentor to many students and members. He has worn many hats as a council member over the last 2 decades and is an inspiration to the entire community. He's been part of various other committees, actively engaging himself either as a chairman or as a vice chairman or as a, and has been contributing a lot for the growth and development of our profession. We're also very proud and glad for your physical presence during the Bhumi Puja Day for the construction of our branch premises held at Chengalpattu district branch of SARC of ICAI during the February of this year. We thank you, sir, for taking time out in your busy schedule to be present with us today. We invite you to present the welcome address and keynote session for today's meeting, sir.
Thank you, Priya ji. My very dear co-chairman of International Standard Board, Sieh Mishra, who hails from Ghaziabad, a well-versed, hard-working, and totally involved in the upliftment of students and members all across the not only big towns but Mumfisal cities also. Shri VGVS Sharma, the Reverend Faculty of the Day, the Honorable Chairman of Chengalpattu District Branch, Shri Radhakrishnan ji, Madam Priya, the host of the day, the Master of Ceremonies, Arun Agarwal, Surbhi Tyagi, Ayaz, and all members who have come here to go home more enlightened. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Standard Board is very keen to present as many seminars as is possible for you. On again next Saturday, that is day after tomorrow, we have a webinar. I won't be there because I'll be traveling to US, but I want to tell you that the board is totally geared to do as many programs as are possible. And in case you want to do any program, feel free to either write to me or write to the board. We will see that the best of the faculty in the country comes and addresses you. Not taking much of it, I'll come with my keynote address. Give me a second. Madam, my PPT is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One second, it will just come. So, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you on today's program. The first topic, the first standard is managing internal audit function. You are all aware that the internal audit function includes various activities. It is essentially a management function as told by Madam Priya also. So what you need to know, you need to understand the stakeholders' expectations. Internal auditor needs to balance stakeholder expectations in the best interest of the organization. And before he does that, when he enters into informal agreement with the company, he needs to formalize the terms of engagement. He has to develop vision, mission statements, and internal audit manual. He has to do audit planning because it must be strategic as also tactical, because what he has to deliver has to come from his long-based understanding of the business of the client and what are the risk factors. Resource assessing and managing, and management. Yes, you have to build a value-based function with right resourcing, a strong, competent team with required skill sets. You need to track performances, engage resources, focus on risks. And risk is very important in every business entity. Risk is very important. If you leave risk, you leave reward, you leave opportunities. If you embrace risk, it is not calculated risk, you are wiped out. So you have to understand, you have to formalize the entire structure of communication. And you always know that the chief internal auditor is responsible for managing internal audit function. Now, SIA 210, managing the internal audit function. This standard deals with the responsibility of the chief internal auditor or a person who has been assigned to coordinate and manage the overall performance of activities related to internal audit. He needs to, you see, so many hands in the picture. A man needs to envisage the entire picture and put that into perspective so that work is done effectively. This standard ensures that the overall objectives of the internal audit are achieved as outlined in the charter or engagement letter. Adequate skilled resources and expertise people are in place and deployed to provide the required level of assurance. Internal audit assignments are undertaken in a systematic, disciplined, and professional manner. The quality of work is very, very important because that quality forms a sound basis for reporting and is supported by evidence and documentation. And more importantly, the work is concluded in conformance with the standards as laid down by ICAI, pronounced by ICAI. Now, SIA 230, objectives of internal audit. What are the terms of engagement and why they are important? Please understand, it is always a human-to-human relationship. The work, the scope of work is important. You need to document the formation and functioning of the internal audit activity and terms of the co-sourced internal audit arrangement so that everyone does its own work. You have to provide clarity to the internal auditor and its stakeholders regarding the nature of internal audit setup and its working. You have to ensure linkage between what is expected of internal audit and how those expectations can be met within the framework governing internal audit. Each and every document has to be given, and I want to put here that if proper documents are not given, you can even give limited assurance or no assurance, because internal audit is essentially done in a different mindset. Promote better understanding on key operational areas such as accountability, authority, roles and responsibilities, and other such functional matters, which are again very, very important. Now, how do you plan internal audit? It is done in a manner that all business processes are reviewed by internal audit function within a defined time. While planning, appropriate consideration is made and adequate balance is ensured to the following. Number one, risk, which is very, very important. Auditor just highlights the risks, the appetite test with the audit committee or the board as the case may be. Value, which can be provided by internal audit, the value addition. Effort involved in conducting the internal audit for a particular business process. Risk appetite, and more importantly, coverage of all auditable areas within the defined time range so that they are able to effectively serve the clients. SIA 220, conducting overall internal audit planning. This standard deals with the planning exercise, the laid down, you call it an audit planning document, a written document. The overall internal audit plan shall be reviewed and approved by the highest governing body responsible for internal audits. Knowledge of the entity, its business, its processes and operating environments shall be undertaken. Audit universe shall be prepared prior to establishing the scope of the overall internal audit plan. A risk-based planning exercise shall form the basis of the overall internal audit plan, and the audit universe and the overall internal audit plan shall be continuously monitored during the execution phase so that you are able to effectively identify any deviation that would have occurred and you are able to effectively work in the standard. Now, the standard on internal audit, SIA 310, planning the internal audit assignment. Yes, you need to be specifically planning each and every auditable unit. It has to be specific in nature because the manner in which a particular audit has to be consigned or audited depends on the business activities or processes that needs to be audited. Assignments are generally completed within a time span. Therefore, it needs to be seen that all important processes are completed and the audit plan is prepared by the internal auditor responsible for the engagement or the engagement staff where an external service provider is appointed to conduct audits. Ladies and gentlemen, this statement provides guidance on planning process, knowledge, knowing the client's business, discussion with management, the risk assessment, audit methodology and depth of coverage so that you are able to effectively report to the audit committee or to the board. Technology deployment, very, very important. What technology is deployed so that you don't live on samples, but the entire subset of working is covered. Resource allocation, what resources with what specific skill sets are allocated, and documentation, which is very, very important. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am done with my presentation. I will not take much of your time because I see Mr. VGVS Sarma waiting here, a man who has a great insight. But before that, we have Mr. Gyan Mishra. I will put on to Madam Priya for further proceedings. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Nandaji. You've told a lot in a nutshell, sir. Thanks a lot. Today, we also welcome Shri Sieh Gyan Chandra Mishra ji, Central Council member, Vice Chairman in Internal Audit Standard Board, ICAI, to speak a few words. Sir is also a member of approximately 23 committees of ICAI. Thank you, sir, for taking time to be present with us today.
Thank you, Priya Madam, for such generous introduction. Very respected, visionary, professional, and of course, a great leader of the profession, my elder brother C.H. Ranju Singh Nandaji. C.A. VGVS Sarmaji, very distinguished speaker of today's session. C.A. Satyanarayan KRji, very respected chairman of the branch. Changalpattu branch, and of course, all the distinguished participants of today's program. Friends, we all know that internal audit is playing very important role as of now in any business organization to match the pace and the quality of the business organization's growth. It is need of our that we must have very clear guidelines about the internal audit systems and controls and procedures. Technology is playing very vital role as of now. We know that without having very expert technology and expert understanding of the technology, nowadays even audit of any kind of audit, whether that might be internal audit, external audit, or whatever it may be, that is basically impractical. Hence, my sincere request to all the participants would be that we have to equip ourselves with the various technological systems and of course softwares as well. With the permission of our chairman, Nanda sir, we are shortly going to have some technological program only under internal standard board. We are coming up with a very good program in which we will be giving technological training program only to the members at large to have the in-depth knowledge about how to use technology on various parameters to conduct the audits. That might be concurrent audit, internal audit, or might be some other audit which may be beneficial for the management. Friends, I will not speak much because Nanda sir ne gagar mein sagar kar diya hai. He has spoken a lot about the standards on internal audit to be discussed by both the speakers. Essay 220, essay 230, essay 210, and I'm sure that all the participants are going to be benefited at large because this is the time that we have to converse ourselves with the best of the practices, blend with the technology to deliver our best to the society at large and of course to the country at large. Thank you, Nanda sir, and of course the board and the branch, managing committee, and most importantly, our learned speaker are guiding the members at length. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gyanji. I'm sure we're all eagerly waiting for this program on technology with respect to audits. It will be really useful for our members.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Friends, we now move on to our first session on standards, SIA 210, managing the internal audit function, and standard SIA 230, objectives of internal audit, by Shri VGVS Sharmaji. We welcome you, sir. He is a CMA professional with more than 34 years of industry experience with expertise in governance, enterprise risk, compliance, forensic, business process consulting domains. He has a wide industry experience. He's been in Big Four as a consultant and has huge experience in manufacturing, telecom, information technology, retail, FMCG sectors as well. He has had wide international experience also. He has served in very big organizations. He is a passionate speaker at various forums on wide range of topics on internal audit, enterprise risk, and forensics. At present, he is currently running his own management consultant firm. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much, Nandaji. Thank you so much, Gyanji. Thank you, Priyaji, for those wonderful, kind words. It truly is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Last time I had this technical glitch, so yeah, this time it's more. Thank you so much. I hope this session is interesting and it will be useful for some of the attendees of this particular session. So I'll quickly jump on to the slide. This has been covered extensively by Nandaji. So this is what this particular standard 210 is to address. Now, what is trying to address? Now, the fundamental objective of this particular standard is how should the audit function be managed, and as Nandaji rightly articulated, It is the fundamental responsibility of the internal audit head, and of course, very closely governed and monitored by the audit committee or board. The fundamental primary objectives of internal audits are very clearly called out and defined in the internal audit charter. We'll discuss that in the subsequent slide in a little bit more detail. And then the functions should be staffed with resources who have adequate skills and expertise to be able to discharge their roles and responsibilities. Mind you, the reports are published to the audit committee and to the board and the management, and therefore you definitely need to have requisite skills and expertise to be able to perform those tasks and audits. Then, as Nandaji rightly said, these have to be performed in a systematic and disciplined and a professional manner. We'll discuss each of these a little bit in detail to understand what does this step really mean and what need to be done to achieve this particular objective. Quality of work. Now, whenever you report as part of your audit engagement, there has to be adequate justification documentation supported by evidences to be able to come to those inferences or conclusions. So what are those good practices? We'll discuss it in the subsequent slides. And then last but not the least, conformance with the standards. We'll also discuss what are the various standards that have been published by ICAI, and this should be nothing less than a Bible to an internal professional. So with that, we'll jump to the next slide. Now, achieving the overall objectives of internal audit. Now, typically, we will also look at a sample internal audit charter. How would it look like? And what all elements are covered in the internal audit charter? And who is responsible for preparing the internal audit charter? Now, what are the fundamental objectives? And these are no different from the objectives of an internal audit function. Now, one of the fundamental objectives, again, Nandaji very clearly called out, is to determine the organization's risk management and control processes. What is the design and effectiveness of the risk management process? And risk management today is the buzzword. And a lot of elements are getting added to the risk management function, be it on cyber side, be it on the operational processes. It has become extremely critical these days. So risks are appropriately, and why this is important. So as part of this, it is important for the function to identify that the risks are appropriately identified and managed, which is the effectiveness of the risk management process that has been put in place. One is the design part, and the next one is the effectiveness. So that has to be reviewed on a continuous basis by the internal audit function. Safeguarding of assets, nothing new. So this is also one of the key elements of the internal audit function. Next one is optimal and effective utilization of resources. It is again the fundamental responsibility of the audit function to make sure that the organization is using the available resources in the most efficient and in the optimal manner. And why that is critical? Because end of the day, these are shareholder funds, or these are the funds that have been loaned by the banks, creditors, and there are various stakeholders whose funds are being invested and are being managed by the organization, and therefore you have a responsibility collectively to ensure that you manage those funds effectively and optimally. Accuracy, reliability, and timely reporting, again, needs no introduction, needs no explanation. This is one of the critical functions of internal audit, and this is gaining traction in the present day situation because of various degrees and kinds of white collar crimes. This becomes extremely critical, and the governments have come up with various regulations and legislations like the IFC, ICFR, SOX in the US, but still I think the degree of sensitivity or seriousness is still lacking, and therefore internal auditors have a huge responsibility in discharging this responsibility. Then compliance to policy standards and procedures, which is again a bread and butter thing for any internal auditor. Whenever you pick an engagement, audit engagement, this is one of the key elements that you look at. Organizational, this is again dealing with compliance to local laws and regulations. Again, something which an internal auditor is definitely required to look into and comment upon and provide an assurance to the audit committee. If you look at most of these, or rather pretty much all of these that we have discussed, they all cover assurance space. There's very little around advisory. Now, advisory work is something which has come in very recently as a trusted advisor to the, because the role of internal auditor is slowly getting enhanced, and it is also taking upon the role of a trusted advisor to the management or even to the board. So we have done a lot of work to the board, because the board directly reaches out to us and says that, can you perform this job and come back to us and submit a report. So it becomes a trusted advisor, and therefore this advisory work is slowly gaining traction. But one should not miss out on the core responsibility of the audit function, which is assurance. Quality assessment and a continuous improvement program is another critical aspect. We need to benchmark ourselves and prepare an organizational maturity map in terms of where we are currently and where do we want to reach within a certain time frame. And we need to work towards it and publish that plan both to the management and to the board, and make sure that we get onto the path of continuous improvement. Now, with this, we move to the next slide. Now, the next objective that we spoke about is resources with adequate skills and expertise. This again requires no detailed explanation. We definitely need to have requisite skills and competencies to be able to discharge our duties whenever you perform either an audit or an advisory engagement. We need to have those requisite skills, or we call it as an SME or subject matter expertise in that area. Now, inventory of, so to achieve this, what do we typically do? We need to compile a list of skills and competencies that are required based on the objectives or the expectations that have been set forth for the audit function. So typically the head of internal audit will need to spend some time discussing both with the audit committee and management to identify what should be the organization structure of the audit function, what kind of skills and competencies that we need to have critically as part. I'm talking of an in-house function. Primarily because we're not looking at an outsourcing function. So what are those key skills and competencies that one should have within the organization? And then prepare an organization structure. Next is, how do you want to manage attrition? Now, you need to discuss that and have the program in place right upfront, because what typically happens is that when individuals go on a long leave, like a maternity or a paternity leave, or it could be on a long medical leave, then or even attrition, which is a big problem that most organizations deal with today, you need to have the program ready and implemented as part of your internal audit continuity management. Now, you can have various programs like a guest auditor program, which I'm sure most of you are aware that you actually load resources from, or SMEs from within the organization who have functional knowledge or expertise. For example, somebody from the treasury function who understands treasury very well to join the audit team to conduct an audit of the treasury function. But then again, there are certain checks and balances that you need to put in place to make sure that the conflict of interest part is well taken care of. Or loan staff. Now, you may have arrangements with B or C category audit firms, and then you might want to hire resources with specialized skills and competencies to be able to perform that audit. Next one is whether you want to outsource or a co-sourcing. This is the model that you would like to discuss upfront with the audit committee and the management while setting up the function, as to who should be the go-to kind of organizations or audit firms, because some audit committees are very, very particular about working with certain audit firms and some are not. Then you need to have those kind of understandings very clearly so that subsequently you do not end up with any disconnect either with the management or with the audit committee. So these are all ways of working in terms of how you effectively manage the internal audit function, especially when you're trying to set up an in-house function. Implementing a competency assessment program. This is so very important for the head of internal audit to continuously assess on an ongoing basis the team's the competency, because what is important is that you also run a lot of these regular training programs, but is that actually having a positive impact on the team need to be assessed by the head of internal audit, and then that need to be revisited regularly, preferably every year, and then that feedback should go back to the individual that those skills still need to be honed. So this is extremely critical. There are multiple parameters that you use while doing this assessment. Training calendar is very, very critical, because you need to understand as head of internal audit, as Raji rightly said, they are all the KRAs of the audit head. So you as an audit head or an audit leader, you need to be very, very clear in terms of what critical trainings need to be carried out, especially in the changing domain. Like Gyanji rightly said, now we are moving into an automation world or an IT world where cyber risks are becoming a norm. So it becomes extremely important to be IT risk aware for any auditor, be it from the finance side or from any other functional side, to be able to effectively perform an audit. And therefore, you need to make sure that your team undergoes orientation and training program, or maybe perform some of the IT audits, or rather ask them to participate in some of the IT audits carried out by your IT audit team or by the outsourcing partner. This is so important because you need to encourage the teams to attend relevant conferences to be able to understand what's happening in the outside world. Because otherwise, you'll be like a frog in well. You will not know what is happening in the external world. What are the kind of challenges that the organizations are dealing with? What are the evolving risks that are coming out, and how are these organizations dealing with them? Because most times, what happens is that you speak to your peer partners, organizations, or your colleagues. You understand that they're also dealing with a similar kind of a problem, but some are dealing pretty well. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So you can actually to understand as to how are they actually, and how can you adapt some of these programs in your organization. The other biggest area that as part of your training and orientation is that use of analytical tools and automation. Now, do you need to have those skills, or whether you want to outsource these kind of skills? What kind of trainings that you want to perform, or at the time of you want this skill to be critical or central to your hiring process? So you need to decide each of these. Mind you, they're not exhaustive. These are again indicative. So you may have a lot of organization specific skills and competencies that you might want to have. But broadly, the messaging is that the audit head will have to identify and understand what kind of skills are required to be able to discharge their duties or perform the job effectively, to meet the expectations of various stakeholders, be it the management, be it the external auditors, be it the audit committee, so on and so forth. Now, what is the next objective? The next objective is internal audit assignments are undertaken in a systematic and disciplined and professional manner. You definitely need to have method to madness. Otherwise, what happens is that you do not have consistency. It would be individual dependent. It will not be process dependent. Unless and until you have an effective process, you cannot ensure consistency on continuity. I heard in the early part of my career when somebody said, when a medical practitioner joins Hindustan Unilever, he will come out as an accountant. Or if he joins a bank, even a practitioner or engineer, he joins a bank, they will make sure that they understand the banking process so very well that they forget the or the medical profession. So that is the kind of rigor with which the process adherence is ensured. Now, for that, what do you need? You need to have a well-documented internal audit methodology. Now, this methodology, as a start, you may begin with something which is patchy, but definitely as you progress, you need to make sure that you benchmark it with some of the best practices. You can take ICAI's guidelines or IAS guidelines or even global best practices, because as you start attending conferences, as you start meeting your peers, you actually try to adopt some of the best practices, which will only enrich the internal audit function, which will only help the function to deliver that much more effectively as you progress. Process mapping for test of design. This becomes extremely important because you definitely need to have a process in place to carry out both the test of design and the effectiveness piece. And it has to follow a particular process or a methodology. I have not seen many people who are very good in process mapping using flowcharts or converting a narrative into a flowchart. So I think this becomes a very, very key skill and a critical skill to be able to do a design level assessment. And this becomes extremely critical when you work on forensics, to be able to understand as to where controls have actually failed and what should have actually operated and why it is not operating, and whether it is a design deficiency or whether it is an effectiveness issue. Sampling methodology, again, I'm sure I think a lot of people in the IT space would say that, now we have evolved into an automation stage where I think it will cover 100% of the sample. Whether it covers 100% of the sample or by exception, I think it still is important and relevant for us to clearly understand the sampling methodology. This is so very critical. I emphasize this many times because what you're trying to do is that you are actually trying to audit a limited sample out of a large population, and you expand the results or you apply the results of this sample across the entire population. Just imagine you might pick up only 1% of the sample of the total population. Of the total population, what I mean is that of the total number of samples that you have selected that you wanted to scrutinize, out of that you might select only 1%. So the actual population will be far higher, far bigger. So therefore, when you apply the results on a larger population, most times what you hear from the management is that this may not represent the entire population. So therefore, it becomes extremely important to apply scientific method to the sampling, and that is a subject in itself in terms of what kind of sampling methodologies that you should use and how should you use, and it should not become judgmental. Use of tools and technology, again, Gyanji also has spoken about this extensively. This is the norm of the day to day. You need to definitely understand availability of various tools, the functionality of various tools, the success rates of various tools, and the technology and the cost of maintaining these tools. Because if you are managing in-house function, it becomes all the more important from the budgetary point of view. In fact, this becomes far more relevant for an organization to implement some of these tools, because at the end of the day, as a functional owner, they should be the ones who should be far more important, rather than an internal auditor coming and telling them after a year that something has terribly gone wrong. So they might want to know in real-time basis. They means the management might want to know on a real-time basis in terms of how the processes and controls that they've implemented are working on the ground. You need to, again, work paper referencing and documentation. No need to tell, because all of you are auditors by profession. This is so very critical. The documentation should be able to speak for itself rather than somebody trying to explain the missing links, because no team is constant. You might have a different team doing a different audit at a different point in time, but when they refer back to an earlier audit, they should be able to understand end to end in terms of the work that has been done and the evidences that have been gathered. Not only the evidences, because when you perform a risk assessment, you would actually download a lot of information, data, you record a lot of information and data. All of that need to be documented to be able to sharpen the scope of your audit. Because when you do the initial audit plan, the annual audit planning stage, the scope is much more wider. But then when you try to sharpen it based on the risk assessment that you carry out at the engagement level, you do a lot of analytics, a lot of data crunching, a lot of information gathering, a lot of discussions which you document. Therefore, all of this will have to be documented and archived in a chronological and a logical manner to be able to cross-reference. Continuous monitoring review, this is again so very critical to ensure that you achieve your objectives and to ensure the quality of the audit. You need to have the team leader and the head of internal audit continuously monitor the progress and the work that has been performed on an engagement. You cannot let your guard down in this particular area, because what typically happens is that once the engagement reaches its closure stage, it becomes extremely difficult to roll back and then perform the audit one more time. So it becomes all the more relevant and important to have continuous monitoring. Observations and inferences. This again, I have seen a lot of auditors commit this mistake of coming to judgments, individual judgments while drafting a report. I feel this cannot happen and therefore there is no need for me to validate. No, unless and until you validate, you have documentary evidences to substantiate, you should not be able to draw those conclusions. Similarly, certain inferences, certain results, you do not draw those conclusions based on your gut feel. it definitely has to be backed by documentary evidences in whatever form and shape. You need to definitely have them as a basis while reaching to those logical conclusions. Nature of evidences need to be very clearly documented in the audit manual. It could be inquiry, what kind of, whether it could be pictures, it could be videos. You have multiple things. When you perform an audit, a picture tells 1,000 words. So most times as auditors, what we do is that we show them. It could be an access issue, gate crashing issue, right? So what we typically do is that we silently watch what is happening. We take pictures, we take videos, and then present them as evidences, or even in the audit committee, we play them. So I think these become extremely effective. So then the basis on which you draft you prepare and circulate your draft report, your final report. Again, you need to have very clearly defined understanding, again documented in the audit internal audit manual, in terms of who all you want to circulate, the engagement letter that you release before undertaking the audit assignment or an engagement, and who wants to be kept abreast of the emerging issues as part of your ongoing audit, because every management team works differently. Their expectations are different. It's always good to document and have those things very clearly documented as part of your audit manual, because then your team will not falter, and then you can also monitor it effectively when you have the checklist to make sure that you don't miss out on all these to-do lists. And then I have briefly mentioned in terms of what you typically cover as part of your draft and final report. So I'm sure most of you, this is something pretty standard, and I'm not dwelling much into it. The next objective of managing internal audit function is the quality of the performance. Again, there is an overlap between the quality and effectiveness, all of that. Now, what is the requirement? What is the need? We need to definitely have a well-documented audit methodology, which I just spoke about. I talked about cross-referencing, documentation, then clearly drawn conclusions and inferences, because most times I've seen that individuals are unable to explain as to why a particular area has been excluded. Is it based on sound judgment, based on information or data, or is it because of the individual perception? Why a certain area has been included? Why the coverage has been widened? Why the coverage has been reduced? All these things, right from the time you initiate the engagement, you need to have a very clearly defined logical explanation, because God forbid if something goes wrong, every individual would like to look into these aspects as to why a particular area has been excluded. Was it done deliberately, or was it done with certain based on certain information or data? So I think we need to have very strong justifications. Observations are based on documented evidences, which we spoke. As I said, there is an overlap, pretty much the same, but then you would have certain overlap. Root causes need to be very clearly understood. This is the biggest gray area that I see when you draft the draft report or the final report. Very few individuals really understand the root cause, and most of the time the root causes appear to be very, very generic. No, that cannot be a root cause unless you have truly understood as to what has actually gone wrong. You will not be able to give a tailored, specific recommendation or a mitigation plan to fix that issue. So understanding the root cause becomes so very critical. And even then, at times, it might become a very harsh thing. For example, if the team is unable to understand the process, or the process has not been properly documented, or there is an ambiguity, you need to call out very clearly. The issue is not with the team, but the way the process has been designed or drafted, that is what is creating the confusion. It could be one of the root causes which you need to fix. So I think you need to be very, very clear in terms of what the root cause is. Impact assessment is again another area where I think a lot of thought need to go into in terms of what truly could have gone wrong. When a particular control fails, you see a certain impact. Now, what is that impact? Which means that if the control is not operating, what could have actually gone wrong? What is the maximum loss that the organization could suffer? Is it a material from the audit committee or the management perspective? I think that is what need to be looked at. I think Nandaji spoke about the risk. That is what is the risk element. Does the particular risk put the organization to risk, or okay, it's something which will not have a huge impact, but yes, I think every loss is critical to the organization, but not so much that it requires the management's key time or critical time or audit committee's time in the audit committee meeting. Is something that need to be called out very clearly and understood while drafting this report. So evidences, I think we just spoke about each of these. So as I said earlier, I think there is definitely an overlap. Now, what are the various standards? Now we are talking about compliance to the various standards issued on internal audit issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. I'm just calling out all the standards which have been released by internal audit. Now, as I said, this is nothing short of a Bible to an internal auditor. Therefore, every audit professional, I urge that they go through these standards, understand if there are any doubts. I think it is good to get clarity on these rather than digesting whatever has been provided. More, you can question as to why am I doing it? Why am I not doing it? Why should I do it? Why should I not do it? I think these are actually good practices to have. You can ask your audit heads or your leadership team to provide you with that understanding. Now I've enlisted and pretty much I'm only covering up to 400 because this is what typically covers the internal audit section, and therefore I'm not calling out the other standards, just to let you know. Now, again, this is the gist of all the key requirements, which is nothing but a summary of whatever that we have discussed till now. You need to definitely have a well-documented internal audit process, or we call it as an internal audit manual, which clearly talks about it should contain your internal audit charter, your roles and responsibilities, the way you manage an engagement, and it talks about everything right from the time you prepare an annual audit plan, commitment of resources, training, budgets, whatnot, everything, including I talked about how you manage your audit engagements, like your samplings and all of that, report writing, then internal assessments. So one is done by the team leader, the other one is done by the head of internal audit in terms of how the audit engagement has been carried out. So there are multiple parameters, both qualitative and quantitative, on which you actually assess whether we actually achieve those objectives or not, and then get the audit feedback. That's how you typically conclude, and the learnings from the audit feedback in terms of what has gone well and what has not gone well and where we need to improve, and then you work on it, and then make sure you conduct trainings and orientations to make sure that your next audit doesn't suffer the same fate. Resource planning, review and monitoring mechanism, we spoke about quality evaluation and improvement plan. Again, the Institute of Internal Auditors recommend that you go through it once every 5 years. You go through the quality assessment, but then it can sit as part of your maturity map. Then instead you can get your peer reviews done, make sure that whether you're there among the best, and whether the management and the audit company can actually place reliance on the reports that you submit to them. So I think that becomes important. Work paper documentation is something that we have spoken in detail. So that is insofar as 210 is concerned. Now we jump on to the next section. I'm moving a little fast due to paucity of time, so I hope the listeners will pardon me for it. Now, objectives of internal audit. Now, what is the fundamental objective of the standard? Now, every audit function will need to understand its roles and responsibilities and the expectations from its various stakeholders. Nandaji spoke about it. You need to very, very clearly understand what is the expectation from the external auditor. Now, they are all diagonally different. The expectations of an external auditor is different from that of a management or from the audit committee. And some of your auditees. So I think you need to have a very clear understanding in terms of what are the various expectations. Your fundamental or key stakeholder in the entire process is your management and the audit committee. So when the internal audit charter is prepared, and typically internal audit charter will cover in detail in terms of what are the expectations from this audit function. what areas need to be covered, what is the scope of work. All of that are very, very clearly defined in the internal audit charter. And this charter is typically prepared by the head of internal audit in consultation with the management and the audit committee, which is finally approved by the audit committee. So it becomes a board approved document that this is your KRA now. This is what you need to work upon, and this becomes your key objective for your function. Now, this is this document, the internal charter again is not something which is cast in stone. It goes through a review every year. So to see that it is always relevant at every point in time. So that becomes critical. So you relook at the internal charter, again, you go back to the management and say that, okay, these certain changes have come into play. Now, for example, related party, you think the related party need to be covered. You go back to the management and to the audit committee and say that, I feel that we need to cover the related party transactions also. And then, depending upon whatever the management or the committee decide, you either amend it or keep it or do whatever that you need to do. But you make sure that it sits as part of your annual audit planning process. It sits as an item that one of the things to do as part of your the annual audit plan is that you review your audit charter to make sure that it stays relevant. So we'll also see a sample internal audit charter. Now, similarly, what happens now when you outsource the function or a particular engagement, similar expectation need to be very clearly documented and communicated to your outsourcing partner. I have come across many a time what happens if you have an open-ended scope. They will go all over the place. They will not be able to complete the assignment on time. And secondly, you will not be able to achieve your desired objective. You need to be very clear in terms of what the scope is and what is the expectation or expected outcome from this particular audit from the SME or an outsourcing partner. It has to be very, very clearly defined, and it should be extremely sharp. So that is actually set out by way of an engagement letter. And this is typically signed by the head of internal audit function of an in-house function. These are all primarily for the in-house functions, because be it the charter or the engagement letter, both are for the in-house functions. Because if we outsource it, obviously, the outsourcing partner would have their own methodology, but it will not be much different. But then they will not have a charter, but they would have the expectations very clearly given as part of their engagement letter by the audit committee or by the management in terms of what the expectations are, which would typically be on the lines of your charter in terms of the scope and coverage of work. So this insofar is the objective. Now, I just spoke about the internal audit charter, and which is no different. So what I will do is that I will try to open this is the sample charter that I've seen picked up of Tata Chemicals. This is available in the public domain on the web. So I'll just quickly run you through just to give you a sense in terms of how a charter will look like. You typically have a mission and statement, and then you would have the areas that need to be covered. So we talked about financial business processes, operational reviews, best practices and benchmarking, these are continuous improvement program. And then even from the, we also talked about attending conferences, which will also help you to bring back some of the best practices into the organization. There are a lot of organizations which actually encourage you to attend some of these the meetings of your peers and bring back some of the. GE had this excellent program where they would encourage individuals to go and visit other organizations and bring back some of the best leadership development. Now comes the scope of work. It calls out very clearly what all is expected. Now, this can change, mind you. This is not something which is again cast in stone or standard. Every audit company, every organization is different, and their expectations are different. But then what happens is that it's called out very, very clearly in the charter, so that there is no ambiguity, there's no confusion in the subsequent date. And there's no blame game that, I was not told, I was not informed, I was not aware. All of that can be done away with. The team. So we talked about the organization structure. So how would the entire team look like? Now, this again can be different for different organizations. Accountability, responsibility is what we spoke about. Independence, which is so very critical for any auditor. And mind you, these are the responsibilities, authorities given by the board by way of this charter, you actually gain the authority through this particular document. This is the document which gives you the authority to have unrestricted access to information, documents, reports, access. So this is the document which gives you that authority, a board approved charter, responsibilities, right? So, so I just wanted to give you a flavor in terms of what typically a charter will look like. Now, this can be as detailed as possible, compliance with the regulatory requirements. So it calls out very, very clearly. Now it's a JV component wherever there are merger acquisitions. There are certain there are charters which clearly call out, in case of a merger acquisition, what is the responsibility of an internal auditor, whether they'll participate as part of due diligence process or not, or whether they will actively participate and monitor in the integration process and report to the board or to the subcommittee of the board, which actually manages these merger acquisitions, risk management, effectiveness, design and effectiveness, whether all the risk elements are being covered and whether the mitigation actions have been put in place. All of that, quality assurance I spoke about, reporting, so who would the head of internal audit report and all of that, and including the circulation of various reports, best practices, benchmarking, leadership development, because you definitely need to have a succession plan in place. So how do you do that? And what are the kind of timelines that you have? Because the charter also will clearly say that within a particular time frame, you definitely make sure that you develop your second line. So that is also critical, because you don't want to block the development of your team members, but then you can take up a higher role. So all of that authority, this authority is given to the head of internal audit by this board approved, through this board approved document, standards of audit practice. Now, in case if there are particular standards that they want us to adhere, the head of internal audit to adhere, it could be IAA, it could be ICAI, or it could be any of the global best practices. So it can tell you very clearly. In this case, it is the Institute of Internal Auditors. It can call out very clearly. So tomorrow, what happens, when you go for an external assessment or a quality, you already have a benchmark. So the auditor can come and then validate the quality of your internal audit methodology or the practice or process by benchmarking that you are benchmarked with either the IAA or ICAI or any of the global best practices, and then submit a report to the audit committee and the board in terms of where you are the maturity map. So this in brief is what I thought I would cover as part of these two particular standards, which are extremely critical. Again, as a parting statement, I would request each one of you to be fully cognizant and thoroughly understand the various sections of aspects and sections of these two standards. And if you have any doubts, I think you can reach out to us or to the Institute, as Nandaji rightly said, and free, but make sure that you thoroughly understand and apply them at your workplace. I think this should help the internal audit profession prepare itself for the emerging and newer challenges. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much. Thanks to Nandaji, Gyanji, and the other members of the Institute for giving me this opportunity. And I hope you find this useful. Thank you once again. Namaskar. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Sharmaji. It was really a wonderful session. I'm sure the benchmarks you have mentioned and the detailed explanation of the functions of internal audit would be very useful for applying in their internal audits. The emphasis you have laid down with respect to the evidences and documentation, especially the internal audit manual, is well taken by us. And specifically, I want to mention here the internal audit charter, which you've been detailedly explaining us, is really useful to us. Thank you, sir. Friends, we now move on to our second session. We welcome Shri Sieh Bharatgarg to speak on SIA 220, Conducting Overall Internal Audit Planning, SIA 310, Planning the Internal Audit Assignment. Shri Bharatji is a chartered accountant and a company secretary with around 2 decades of experience in internal audits, process and compliance reviews, investigations, operational risk management, and revenue assurance. He is also a certified internal auditor and is currently pursuing his CISA certification. His exposure spans across all these sectors: consulting, private and public, is immense. He has worked in highly reputed organizations and has got varied exposures in multiple industries and sectors like telecom, manufacturing, and FMCG. Sri Bharatji is currently working as Head of Audit, Fidelity International. He is also associated with Institute of Internal Auditors Delhi chapter and Institute of Internal Auditors India as a Vice President and Board member, respectively. And also, he publishes a monthly digital magazine, Internal Audit Today, on behalf of the Institute of Internal Auditors India as Chairman Publications Committee. He has supported the ICI Committee for Standards on Internal Audit. We welcome you, sir, to speak on SIA 220 and SIA 310. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Priya, for the introduction. And good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy. I would like to thank Nandaji, Gyanji, Satyanarayanji, ISB Chengalpettu branch, and the ISB team, Arunji, Artiji, for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts and talk about a couple of interesting standards or internal audit. Let me share my screen. Okay, so our today's topic is standards on internal audit 220 and 310. So we'll be talking about these two standards in next 40-45 minutes. So I'll be providing a brief introduction about both the standards. Then we'll move on to standard 220, which is about overall internal audit planning. And this is at a macro level, wherein we are talking about the internal audit plan for the entire period. And we'll be discussing some of the key elements, its objectives and process. Then we'll move on to the second standard, 310, planning the internal audit assignment. That is at a micro level, and it deals with an individual internal audit assignment. So any individual, audit which will perform, say for example, as simple as HR and payroll or something like that. And again, the format of this standard as well is quite similar. In fact, there are a lot of similarities. I'll touch upon those similarities and differences in the next few slides. Okay, so both the standards which we'll be covering, they are pertaining to planning, and we all know how imperative is planning. And as you know, Benjamin Franklin has said, success is the residue of planning. So why is planning so important? As you all will appreciate that no organization has got infinite resources. So the resources available with any organization for their day-to-day functioning, or more particularly for the internal audit function, they are finite. And within those finite resources, be it in terms of budget, be it in terms of the resource availability, be in terms of even availability of stakeholders availability, because they are also busy in their day-to-day work and running the show. So considering all that constraints, it's very, very imperative that we plan well, we plan appropriately, we plan efficiently, so that we achieve the overall objectives of the internal audit function. As I said earlier, we will be covering these two. The first one, standard on internal audit 220, overall IA plan for a period. So basically, one internal audit plan as to what are the various audits which the function would be conducting in the period. So the period may be defined as 1 year typically, but yeah, we can talk about it in subsequent slides.
Bharatji, can you make it full screen, sir?
Full screen. Okay, 1 second. Sure, Priyaji. Is it better now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Perfect, sir.
And the second one is specific to an IA assignment. So herein we'll be dealing with an individual audit assignment. Okay. The first standard further says, and it talks about the statutory requirement that the audit committee of the company or the board shall, in consultation with the internal auditor, formulate the scope, functioning, periodicity, and methodology. So it's not only the standard, but there is a statutory responsibility which is cast upon the chief internal auditor or engagement partner, in case it's an outsourced function, to basically define the scope, functioning, periodicity, and methodology. So the chief internal auditor and it have to, so basically the responsibility is on the audit committee and board, but definitely the lead will be taken by the chief internal auditor, and of course inputs from the statutory auditors, the executive management, they all will be considered. I should also mention that this particular statutory requirement is not for all companies, but mainly for listed companies, and those companies which has got a paid up capital of more than 50 crores, turnover more than 200 crores, loans more than 100 crores, and deposits more than 25 crores. So it's restricted to those companies only, but definitely all organizations, big or small, they need to ensure that the internal audit scope, functioning, everything is well defined and put in place, and it's duly approved. Okay. So the key elements for the first standard, it's comprehensive. It need to encompass the entire entity, and there should be one internal audit plan which should talk about what all audits which we would be intending to undertake in the defined period. Second is it have to be directional in nature. So it should again encompass all the business units, all legal entities, geographies, regions. Think of an organization which is very diversified, pretty large organizations, which has got interest in multiple products, multiple services, has got a lot of legal entities, and it's spread across multiple geographies, regions, and even countries as well. So this internal audit plan will be at an entity level, and this internal audit plan will encompass each and every aspect of those business. Timing. Typically, this is prepared in the beginning of the plan period. Now, what is plan period? So it may be 1 year, but as you know that 1 year was sufficient enough few years back, or maybe 1 decade back. But these days we live in a very dynamic environment. There are a lot of technology disruptions which is happening. There are a lot of new models which are coming up. So, and we live in a very, very dynamic environment. So it's imperative that the plan period are getting shorter. So if I take example from my organization, we have also recently shifted from annual audit plan to 6+6 plan. Now that means that the audit plan will be defined for the entire year, but it won't be crystallized. The plan will be crystallized for next 6 months, and for the remaining 6 months, it's a rolling cycle. For the remaining 6 months, we'll keep on evaluating if there is a need to embed any other thing within the plan. Now, who is responsible? So the overall internal audit plan is to be prepared by the chief internal auditor. He is responsible to make sure that the plan has been prepared appropriately and in consideration of various aspects, which we'll be dealing in subsequent slides. And of course, it's duly approved. And as we all know that internal audit can be both outsourced and it can be done in-house. So in case the entire internal audit function or activities are outsourced, then of course, engagement partner is responsible for preparing the internal audit plan. And the final outcome, very straightforward. So we would be expecting an internal audit plan, which will talk about these are the X number of audits which will be delivered in the plan period. The standard also talks about the scope. I think we have already covered. So it has to be an IA plan, and it's the responsibility of chief internal auditor or engagement partner. Okay. As per standard, these are the objectives of preparing an internal audit plan. So in the last session, we heard from the seasoned and learned, VGVFG with respect to audit charter. So the audit, which is the guiding force, or which is, which provides the direction for the function. So first and foremost, the audit plan for the organization, it need to be aligned with the audit charter. What are the objectives of the IA function and the overall organization? So it has to be completely aligned. Second is, while we are formulating the audit plan, it should be aligned with the organizational risk assessment, including risk mitigation measures. Now, take example of Ukraine. So if there is an organization which is based in Ukraine and an audit plan is being prepared, probably geopolitical risk will be a key consideration. And that must be considered while formulating the audit plan. where vis-a-vis, if you compare any other geography which is more stable, say Australia, New Zealand, so definitely geopolitical risk won't be a major risk and won't be considered. I come from a banking and financial services industry, so if I have to consider, the my organization top risk, so probably it will be information security, it will be regulatory compliances, it may be, payment risk, it may be money laundering related aspects. So those need to be considered while we formulate the audit plan. So this will actually help us ensure that we provide appropriate coverage, appropriate focus on the critical aspects. Broad scope, methodology, depth of coverage, as we discussed in the previous slide. So this is also cast upon as a statutory obligation, and this needs to be confirmed and agreed with those who are charged with governance. So herein, this term is being used in standards, and it largely means either the board, or in case the responsibilities are delegated to audit committee, then the audit committee. Overall resources are adequate, skilled, and deployed appropriately. This is again very important since we talk about, the planning. The chief internal auditor or engagement partner need to ensure that whether they have the adequate resources. So there shouldn't be any instance that, we overcommit and underdeliver. We may not be saying, we should be able to deliver 20 audits, or we should be able to cover, the entire audit universe, but we do not have the resources, or the organization, have not given appropriate budget. So the overall resources needs to be considered, both in terms of the budgets, financial budgets, and also in terms of, number of available resources. And it's not only about the resources, but also, the skill set of those resources. So think of a fintech and internal audit function of a fintech, and they don't have a tech resource. So would that really make sense? Probably not. Will they be able to do justice to the internal audit within that fintech? Probably not, because they will need highly skilled technology resources to perform their responsibilities appropriately. And of course, the resources need to be deployed appropriately. So whenever, we are thinking of multiple audit assignments, we would be looking at the appropriate resource input, and there are multiple factors which are considered. It may be, proximity to the business if it is based on a particular location, because in person definitely, would have some advantage over remote auditing. And the skill set, the experience, the complexity of area, so all of those things may be considered. And then a very generic one, that all the audits, they need to conform with applicable pronouncements of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. In terms of key considerations, and before I move on to the key consideration, I must mention that the entire internal audit, the internal audit or chief internal audit, they need to apply professional judgment and skepticism. That's very, very important. These are all the considerations, these are all the various inputs which an internal auditor or CIA may consider, but at the end, professional judgment may prevail. So some of the things which CIA may consider while preparing an internal audit plan is the knowledge of the business. So it's very, very imperative. One should understand what is the business environment, what are my products, what are my service offerings, where am I operating, what are the challenges in a different geographies, what are the regulatory obligations in a particular geography, are there any key issues, are there any key threats. So basically a complete SWOT analysis, which means what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are the threats which are looming over the business. So those need to be considered before we formulate an internal audit plan. The next is management and stakeholder discussions. So this again is very, very imperative. So internal auditors, they are the third line. They are sitting on the fence. They need to have a detailed understanding of the business, but actually it's the management, it's the stakeholders who are running the show. They are at the helm of affairs. They know their business pretty well, and it's imperative that we speak with the management. We understand what are their challenges, what are they thinking, what is the direction of travel, all those kind of stuff, and those discussions will be immensely helpful, and they have a significant impact on the overall internal audit plan. And the discussions may not be restricted only to the senior level or executive management level, CEO minus one, but I would suggest that you go even at a floor level, process level, senior manager level, and understand what is the ground realities, what are the key challenges, what are they facing, what are the key issues, all those kind of stuff. And that of course will be a key input for the preparing the internal audit plan. Audit universe, this again is very important, uh, and as you'll notice that I have highlighted these two bullets, audit universe and the next one. So there is a specific reason. In fact, these are a couple of bullets which are the differentiating factors between the two standards which we'll be covering. So I'll talk about it in a while. In terms of audit universe, again, if we approach any particular internal audit assignment, we would always look for comprehensiveness or completeness. So that's the one attribute which we would always like to test. So similarly, when you are preparing an internal audit plan, you need to be mindful of the entire audit universe of the organization. You need to be aware what are the various businesses, what are the geographies, legal entities, basically each and every conceivable audit object which may be audited separately or jointly. So all of that should form part of your audit universe. And typically, it may be a replica of the entire organization structure. So whereby you start from the top and see, what is it that CEO is responsible for? What is it that the, people beneath CEO minus one or CEO minus two are responsible for? So this is the approach which we follow in our organization, and preparing, updating, maintaining the audit universe, because many times it may happen that we might be aware of x number of products. So if you think of an FMCG, probably you might be thinking that in a very large FMCG group, I would say, you might be thinking that there are only 10 products, but probably there is a 11th product, and it might be processed, produced, distributed out of a small factory unit somewhere. So it's imperative that you understand it appropriately, and it forms part of your audit universe. And your audit universe may also need to be multidimensional. Not only it should lift all your audit objects, but it should also lift the various geographies, or where from it is the various legal entities. Say for example, I'll keep on taking an industry agnostic example like HR and payroll. So if I think of payroll as an audit object, it's fine, but it may have multiple attributes. It may have attributes like the payroll for, let's say, continental Europe legal entities, UK legal entity, or Luxembourg based, France based, Germany based, and other aspects maybe where from it is being processed. So definitely there will be some elements which will be done out of Germany. Then there will be some elements which could have been offshore to, say, Philippines, to India, to Dalian, or to any other geography. So it should be multidimensional, and it should capture each and everything. So that's a significant key risk in case the audit universe is not comprehensive, because then there is high chance then some of the audit objects which are left out of audit universe, they may not get audited at all, because they are definitely going to miss your attention. uh, Next is independent risk-based planning exercise. So in organizations where there is a 3 lines model, or where management himself is responsible for doing the risk assessment and identifying the inherent risk within their individual processes and the functions, and what are the mitigating controls and the residual risk. So that's one side. On the other hand side, the internal audit function may also perform a high level risk-based planning exercise. So they may perform a risk assessment. I have a separate slide for it. I'll share some of the practical examples or the approach which we follow in our organization. So, and we'll discuss this bullet point specifically in next slide. Next is technology deployment. So within technology deployment, again, it's important to consider the various technology aspects. So you may consider things like whether the organization is mature enough, or whether the organization is innovative and moving to the cloud, or still relying on the on-prem solutions, whether most of the applications which are being used, they are third party applications, or are they developed in-house. You may consider aspects whether those applications are being managed, or day-to-day administration, user access provisioning, day-to-day interface management, all of that is done in-house, or it has been outsourced to a third party. You may consider aspects with respect to how mature the overall organization is with respect to adoption of technology, or is it still manual. So those kind of stuff may be considered. Then resource availability. Again, as I said, we shouldn't be over committing and under delivering. We should be mindful of the financial budgets and the resources while preparing the internal audit plan. Regulatory statutory expectations. So this comes on the top. So there may be X number of things. We may be considering all whatever we have discussed so far under A to F. But if there is a specific regulatory requirement within a particular geography, and the regulator or the statutory authority expects you to complete a particular audit or do a particular audit assignment, so that definitely finds a place in the internal audit plan, irrespective of the fact that it doesn't score pretty high on the risk matrix. So say for example, to promote diversity in UK, there are certain organizations which are required to do an annual audit on gender pay gap reporting. So this is an obligation onto the management, but in many instances, the organizations may expect the internal audit to have an independent view. Or in certain geographies like Korea, there are expectations that some of the financial statements are to be reviewed by the internal auditor as well. Of course, in a subtle manner, the scope is different, the methodology is different. But the point I am trying to make is that in case the internal audit function is obliged to do something, then of course that have to be a part of the internal audit plan. So I'll share an example. Like I work for Fidelity International, and we are spread across more than 25 odd countries. So one of the exercise which we did long back, and which we keep on refreshing quite frequently, is that we understand what are the various regulatory or statutory expectations from internal auditor. So is it that the financial regulator, say for example RBI or CBE, if I draw an analogy to Indian environment, if they have cast any responsibility for the internal audit function, for the chief internal auditor to do something XYZ, if yes, then definitely that should be your top priority. Approval, pretty straightforward. So once an internal audit plan has been approved, it needs to be approved by those charged with governance, and it includes either the board or the audit committee, as the case may be. And one very important thing, we should also be appropriately documenting and seeking an approval on various limitations. So if there are certain aspects which are critical, and which couldn't find a place in the audit plan, irrespective of your intentions, for whatever reason, be it paucity of resources, or the management not being available, or whatever. So all of those limitations need to be documented appropriately. Then continuous monitoring, again, very, very important. It's not a case in today's dynamic environment that one internal audit plan has been prepared for an year or for a particular period, that it's the job is done, and you may look at it in the next year or in next half year or so. It need to be continuously monitored for anything which is evolving, any external factor, any internal factor, something which has happened within the organization or within the broader industry. If there is any geopolitical risk, if there is any other key change or changes in the regulatory or statutory obligations, because uh, it's always easy to go back to the audit committee or to the board in case there is something meaty and you would like to do it. So again, if I give an example, so when COVID struck in 2020, so all of the organizations, they were taken off guard, and the hiring practices, in terms of interviewing people, onboarding of people, uh, and in case the people are moving from one business unit to another, internal transfers, or in case they are being transferred to other country as well, and in case the employees are leaving the organization, then how do you surrender the assets, how do you complete all the exit formalities. So all of that have to be changed drastically, because everything was and with respect happening physical environment, there were a lot of documents which required wet signature, but now everything have to be changed. And over a period of time, we also saw instances wherein people were moonlighting. In fact, there was an instance I remember some time back in the newspaper, that there was an employee who was working in 7 organizations. Yes, you heard it right, 7 organizations, and it was identified by within from the PF authorities itself. So the entire practices have to be changed, and within our organization in 2020 itself, we changed our plan, and we performed an audit of joiners, movers, and leavers. We looked at all the practices. How has HR adapted to the new environment? What are the controls? Which controls have been diluted? What are the mitigating controls? What are the compensating controls? What is the residual risk? Can we live with it? All of it. So that's how is the purpose of continuous monitoring. Next aspects of standard, it talks about there are certain things which needs to be clearly documented for an audit trail. So standard stipulates that the business info which we would have collated and which we have collated from various discussions from with the stakeholders, with the statutory auditors, the information which has been available with us on the basis of our regular engagements, attending various risk committees, risk forums, or the board meetings. So all of that need to be documented, because that's a critical input as to how we have proceeded and prepared the internal audit plan. Next is risk assessment documentation. We spoke about risk assessment. So the risk assessment performed by the internal audit, what is the output of it? That again forms a key input for preparing internal audit plan. So should be documented appropriately for future reference. And audit trail, audit universe, again, it has to be there. It is, in fact, it's a live document which we keep on updating quite frequently. Summary of auditable units, so a brief summary of each and every audit object, that would always be helpful. The resource plan in terms of financial budget, as we would expect for any other function to have, the number of resources which are available, skill set, everything. And of course the final output, which is the internal audit plan. Okay, so this is a sample from one of our planning slides. I won't go into detail, but basically, as you can see on the top, we have the chief audit executive, then you have multiple auditable businesses. And again, if I take a generic function, support function, HR, and within HR itself, you may have multiple functions. It may be talent acquisition, it may be talent development, training, compensation benchmarking, HR operations, payroll, all those kind of stuff. So it may further be bifurcated into it. And then this is how we perform the risk assessment. So one is for each of the audit object. So I spoke about HR. Within HR, I spoke about talent acquisition. If you consider the journey or the life cycle of an employee, so talent acquisition, talent development, compensation benchmarking, payroll, HR operations. So what are the statutory or regulatory requirements applicable to that particular audit object? All of those need to be considered. If there is any significant change which is underway, say for example, labor wage code bill is underway, or data protection bill is underway, then risk assessments. So herein you will notice that we are talking about the risk assessment as the uh, excise, and within the risk assessment we have lifted another risk assessment. So this risk assessment is being performed by the internal audit function at the time of preparing their internal audit plan. This risk assessment is the one which is prepared by the management, because They are the first line. They are responsible for managing the risk. So we can definitely and we should be leveraging on the risk assessment of the management information as to what are the key issues, key challenges, key KPIs, key risk indicators which the management is considering, again, for each and every individual audit object. Projects, if there is a particular function or a process which is undergoing significant change, or there is a key project, or it is, there may be a project to outsource, there may be a project, to automate, there may be a project, to make any other key change, and then those need to be considered while giving an appropriate score or performing the risk assessment. Management stakeholder discussions we covered in the past, again applicable to each audit object. Technology incidents, risk events. So how has the function or that particular audit object been in the last period or plan period? So has there been large number of risk events? Has the systems been flaky? Are there too many technology incidents? Is it breaking down too frequently? So those kind of stuff may be considered. Industry info, quite straightforward. Again, for each and every, say for example, we are talking about HR and we are talking about one of the audit object and talent acquisition, then we all are hearing about the great resignation drive, the great resignation drive. Yeah, that's right. So there is a lot of challenge in attracting the right talent. There is a lot of challenge in attracting, the right people and at the right cost. So that's an industry info. So you may wish to consider it, or you may wish to consider it while performing risk assessment for talent acquisition, because that may have an impact onto your strategy. Risk governance forums packs. So on an ongoing basis, the chief internal auditor and the team beneath it, they may be attending a lot of, risk forums, governance forums. They may be meeting stakeholders. You may be getting a lot of information via the packs, via the dashboards. So that may also be helpful in understanding as to what's going on within that particular audit object. Other external oversight, if the organization has got other oversight functions like risk function may be separate, or compliance function may be separate, or something, the management has got done from outside, they have hired an external consultant for deep dive or for some reviews. So the output of those may be considered for your risk assessment. Open known issues, of course, whatever is the residual risk, whatever is the issues which are known to the management. So all of those are to be considered. A score need to be a weight need to attribute, may be attributed to each of these aspects, and then you may come up with, how risky a particular audit object is in terms of, its inherent risk, how strong is the control environment, and what is the residual risk. Considering all of those factors, you may consider, as to which are the top 10, top 20, top 30, or whatever, your resource permits you. What are those top 20, 30 audit objects which you would like to audit? Okay. Planning the internal audit assignment. So far we spoke about the internal audit plan for the entire period, lifting 20, 30, 40, whatever the number of audits. Herein we are talking about an individual audit assignment. I'll keep on using my same example, HR and payroll. So if now we have to do an audit of HR and payroll, what are the things which we should be considering? Let's see what standard says. Key elements, it's subset of the overall IA plan. Of course, it's one of the line item in the entire internal audit plan. So your internal audit plan may say 50 audits, and one of them may be HR and payroll. Specific, a part of the entity, and approach manner. So again, it will be very specific. If I take example of my organization, as I said, it's spread across 28 countries. I may not like to cover HR and payroll for the entire organization. It may be too mammoth, it may be too complex, because it cuts across multiple legal entities, multiple nuances of those areas. So I would be very specific, and that specific, it may be, I may say that I would like to cover only the North America, or I may like to cover, only the APAC region, and I may like to cover only HR and payroll for those region and those legal entities only. Timing. So when would you like to have the internal audit plan for a particular internal audit assignment? So definitely, it have to be done in the beginning of the plan period when we are going to initiate the audit. And of course, this will be completed in a short span of time. So any individual audit assignment, it shouldn't take more than 2-3 months, assuming 1 month each for planning, reporting, and 1 month each for planning, fieldwork, and reporting. Though it may depend on complexity, but typically, as compared to the audit plan, it's a very shorter span. Responsibility. So in the last standard, the responsibility was on the chief internal auditor and the engagement partner. Herein, the responsibility is internal auditor because the auditor will be executing the plan or engagement staff in case of outsourcing. Outcome internal audit assignment plan. So we would expect a plan as to what are the things which has been considered, why we have defined a particular scope, and includes the RCM or whatever way you call it. Key objectives. This will be in alignment with the objectives of overall IA plan, of course. So again, taking same example, HR and payroll. So if the objective is to cover the entire gamut of HR and payroll on a rolling cycle of say 3 years, then of course I'll make sure that I'll cover, let's say, APAC in 1 year, or the continental Europe in another year, and America in third year, and so on and so forth. So basically it has to be aligned with the objectives of overall IA plan and in line with stakeholder expectations. Now that doesn't mean that the stakeholder will be guiding the scope of audit. We are an independent function, but basically in case there are any specific nuances, or in case there are any specific requests, so those may be covered. Scope coverage methodology, which is adequate to provide reasonable assurance. Something more in detail on this, but quite straightforward. Adequate time, resources, assignment of appropriate skills. Again, in the previous standard, we spoke about the availability of the overall number of resources, but herein we are talking about for a particular audit assignment. So if I think that the particular internal audit assignment is pretty small, I may assign 2 months. If it is pretty complex, it may be pretty large, it may encompass multiple geographies, it may require a lot of travel, or because of business requirements, stakeholder non-availability, I have to spread it thin, then probably I may provide appropriate time. So I may extend it to 4 months. So that need to be considered well in advance. Resources. Of course, the plan need to consider, which all resources should be deployed. So if you are doing an audit in finance, probably you would like to have somebody from a finance background. And in case you need to cover some of the technology aspects, then probably you may also like to have a technology resource as well onto the particular audit assignment. Wherein if you are covering a operational audit, probably you are fine if the person is from some other background, and the person is quite skilled in the operations. Assignment of appropriate skills you have covered. Audit procedures, they need to be efficient and effective. They need to make sure that the objectives of the assignment are fulfilled. They are efficient, and they are effective as well. We are not doing it just for the sake of doing. The time is precious, the resources are precious, the stakeholder is also busy in their day-to-day job. So while we perform in particular audit procedures, we should be thinking as to is it right, is it appropriate, does it make sense, and will it add value, and is it important for my objectives or not. And the common statement in terms of audit assignment, it should conform with all applicable pronouncements of ICAI. As you can see, this particular slide, or the key consideration, they are all together same. They are all together same, but we'll be talking a bit in more granularity, except this audit methodology and depth of coverage. So this is something where the two standard differs. In this standard, these are the two differentiating aspects, and of course for obvious reasons, because in an individual audit assignment we will not be talking about audit universe, or will be not be talking about comprehensive risk assessment. Knowledge of the business environment. So herein we will be talking more. So while talking about the individual internal audit assignment, we'll be uh, uh, having a more in-depth understanding of the business, of the environment, how, again in HR and payroll, how it is being run, whether the overall process is manual, whether it is automated, whether it is done in-house, whether it is outsourced, whether it's spread across one location or is it spread across multiple locations. So there may be inputs may be coming in, let's say for example, inputs may be coming in uh, from your American partner. The HR is sitting over there, but actually the processing is being done in Philippines. So you need to understand the overall environment. Sorry, 1 second, please. Sorry, my apologies. Okay, so management stakeholder discussions, again, we'll be talking about more at a granular level. We'll be discussing, this is the standard process wherein we'll approach the head of the function. We will understand, what are their key KPIs, what are their key KRIs, how has been the function in last few months. Are there any gray areas? Are there specific things which they would like us to focus upon? Is there anything wherein we can add value? Are there any issues which are already known to them and they are working towards it? In fact, what we do is we always give credit to the management in case there is something known to the management. In fact, we have defined it into two broad buckets. So in many instances, you may come across that the management understand after, these are the X number of issues. So everyone will say, my processes are fragmented, or, my processes are not automated. There is a lot of manual dependency. But what is more important is what are we doing to mitigate those risks? So we may be aware of something, but in case it's not, there is no time bound action plan with responsibilities fixed, budgets being approved, then probably it may continue to be a risk for a long period of time. So then we perform risk assessment. Now this risk assessment again is more granular. So for HR and payroll, I'll be considering risk assessment to identify what are the key risks within the HR and the payroll function. And again, it would always make sense to leverage onto the risk assessment performed by the business. So if HR head has already performed a risk assessment, they would be more aware of their inherent risk, what are the controls which they have put, what are the residual risks. So we can always leverage that, and we can always look, if there is something which they have missed, we can look at the quality of the risk assessment, if it has captured each and every aspect, those kind of stuff. Then audit methodology and depth of coverage. So herein there are few aspects which we may consider. So one is very straightforward. So for every function, there may be certain policies and procedures which may be there. There may be certain organization level policies which are which hits at an entity level and applicable to the all the functions. So one of the aspects which we would like to do is ensure compliance to all of the organization-wide policies, of course, applicable organization-wide policies, and the procedures of that particular function. Then we will be evaluating the design of the controls which have been put in place. We will be performing operating effectiveness. If the controls, they may be fit for purpose, but the controls may not be operating effectively. And of course, then there are many things which comes into picture when you talk about your approach. How do you select your sample? So if it is within a particular function, towards the end of the year, or during the holiday season, or towards the end of the period, there may be spike in volumes. So you may expect that it always strains controls. So you may pick up samples from there. So all of that will come in your audit methodology, how you will be covering it, what will be your sampling size, all of those things may be covered. Technology deployment, again, once you have understood have to know how whether the overall function is being managed manually, or is it automated. Say for example, if payroll, so if the everything is automated. if everything is automated, or is it dependent upon functions, or the systems are fragmented, if there is only one system, or if the inputs are coming in from multiple systems. So you may have one centralized HR system which may have record of each employee, their current compensation, but then there may be certain top ups. You may have separate systems to monitor the overtime. You may have separate systems to monitor certain deductions on for the leave purpose. The systems may not be integrated. So all of those need to be considered if you would like to cover the technology piece within your internal audit assignment. You may cover the and it doesn't uh, it doesn't be restricted only to the ITGC, whereby you will be talking about user access controls over if somebody can change the compensation of a particular employee, or talking about the IT general controls, or IT operations, or the change management. But you may also consider application controls. You may also consider the interfaces between multiple systems. How are the systems being fed in case they are automatic interface, or they are files which are being uploaded. Resource availability, again, we have discussed in the past, but again for specific, so you may like to consider as from three aspects. So you may want to consider and if the audit assignment may require an operational auditor, if an audit assignment may require a technology auditor, will there be opportunities for data analytics? In that case, you may also like to sound off your data analytics team, or you may like to allocate a DA auditor as well, who may help you with the DA and assignment. So all of those things need to be considered when you plan for the audit resource. And you also need to be mindful of the fact that uh, the the basically the holidays plan, and or maybe I'll cover it in a separate piece. The regulatory statutory expectations, again specific to the payroll. So what are the various HR laws which are applicable in India? So we would be considering it while doing an HR and payroll audit. Approval, communication of limitation, actually it should be read out of scope in the interest of time, so I'll be moving bit quickly. So once an planning document has been approved, and once an the RCM has been approved, it has to be approved by the chief internal auditor. Again, if I remind you, in the previous SIA, it was the internal audit plan which was approved by the board or the audit committee. Herein we are talking about the individual internal audit plan or planning document, and the RCM which has to be approved by the chief internal auditor, or in case in a large organization it may further be delegated. And again, continuous monitoring. The auditor need to follow an agile approach during the course of audit if they feel that there are certain areas which has been de-scoped, or in the initial planning stage, and which makes sense now, or they may like to extend the audit, or there are certain areas which seems meaty, but now the control seems to be pretty good, so you may like to have lesser focus. So all of those things may be considered, and you can always go back and make tweaks in your plan. In terms of documentation, all of the things which has been helpful for you in preparing the planning document and the RCM, those need to be documented appropriately, and those need to be stored and made available for future reference. It may involve planning process checklist, how you have gathered the information, what are the systems, processes, flow charts, process diagrams, summary of your meetings with stakeholders, how you have when and how you have communicated with the key stakeholders about the audit, its timings, the risk assessment which you would have performed, available resource, their competencies, how do you think the resources are fit for purpose or sufficient to carry out the audit assignment, detailed program, and the IA plan. So E and F, so one is the planning and another is the RCM. So if I talk about certain practical examples in next few minutes, so if I have to consider a particular audit assignment, we may be considering, or we may be lifting things like that. It has to be linked to the audit universe. So whatever audit I am doing, so it should be linked as to what aspect of the internal audit universe is being tackled or being catered to by this particular audit assignment. So if I am doing HR, so probably it should be going back or taking to that internal audit plan. What all legal entities will be covering, where all this audit will happen, whether this particular audit has happened in the past. If yes, what was the overall rating? What were the key issues which were noticed? Why are we doing this audit? What is the driver for this audit? Is it really a risk based, or is it, because of a statutory requirement that we are doing this audit? Who are the key stakeholders whom I need to collaborate for the purpose of this audit? Many times, again, in case of HR and payroll, so of course, prima facie it may be HR and payroll, but then you may like to go back to some other functions. You may like to understand from the legal F to how the HR related or labor laws related compliances are being dealt with. You may also like to have interface with the finance in understanding how the payments are being made. So cross functional stakeholders, they may need to be considered. You may also consider as to if there has been any other oversight which has been done by the business itself or by any other function. What are the open issues which are known to the management? Your planning document may talk about what is the exact scope, what are the key things that you may be auditing, what are the key things that you have excluded out of the scope, why you have excluded those things out of the scope. Is it because the risk is very less? If yes, what is the rationale? What is the audit evidence to ensure, or basically to give confidence to the CIA that yes, this is really not worth spending time upon. In case you feel that this may be, this is an interface, or this may be dealt in some other audit assignment, that then it's always a good practice to mark it, that if there is XYZ aspect which I would like to cover descope, but this is meaty, this is important, but this may get covered in another audit, and you should be giving reference to it. What are the timelines which we should be working upon? And on course, one thing which we always do is in our audit planning, we always consider the holiday plan of our resources, the holiday plan of stakeholders. So if an audit plan, if to run audit is to be run for 3-4 months, so it's always good in initial meeting to understand if there are any public holidays coming, if there are any holidays when your resource of stakeholders will not be available, or if there are any particular periods during which your stakeholders may not be available. So again, in financial services, towards year end, probably your stakeholders may not be available. Then there are certain core controls which you may like to consider, which are irrespective of any audit assignment. So you may consider things like EUCs or EUDAs. So basically, probably these are the terms which you use. So basically, which are not standard applications or systems, but basically which has been designed at a shop level or process level, something wherein you are using macros but or models, but those are very, very critical for the overall functioning. You may like to consider BCP aspect. So what may happen in case of, say, loss of sight, or in case technology is not available. Again, if I remind you example of uh, um, uh, COVID scenario, then, and in case the payroll processing is outsourced, then the vendor, whether they have the appropriate operational resilience to come up in case of any challenges. So those kind of things may be considered. You may consider the vendor dependency. You may consider the various statutory requirements. So all of these core controls, which are not specific to any particular audit assignment, may also be considered while you plan your scope. With this, I bring an end to my presentation, and the floor is open for any questions. Over to you, Priyaji. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bharatji. Your session was very useful to us. In fact, you've highlighted a lot on the key considerations on multiple dimensions of an audit universe and audit entities, which were really very vital. In fact, you've also laid emphasis on risk matrix, risk assessment, and audit plans, which are very essential for an audit. Surprising to know about this employee part, which you said around 7 employments he was in. So, in fact, generally we've heard during COVID, there were instances where at least some employees have been in 1 or 2 employments. So 7 is really surprising for us. So, like, how did this get unearthed? So that we would really like to know.
Okay, so all of this information is in public domain, and from what I read, I understand that this was highlighted because now, as you know, all the organizations, they deduct PF, and they'll be remitting it to the PF authorities, and all of those PF remittances, they are attached to one unique UAN number. So that's how it was detected, because then probably the PF authorities understood that how is it possible that one particular UN number is getting 7 remittances. So this entire information is available in public domain. So I request if you are interested in more details, so you may search on Google, and I'm sure you will find it. But there are many examples of people or staff doing moonlighting in COVID scenario. But yeah, and probably this may be ethical moonlighting may become a norm in some years from now.
Okay. That is surprising, sir. Anyway, sir, your session was very interesting. Thank you, sir. We now move on to question and answer session. As of now, we have 3 questions posted. Can I go ahead in reading them? There is one by Sieh Shweta Patil. Sir, the audit charter should be approved by top management, and audit committee should approve this charter. So the approval of the charter she's asking about.
VGVS, sir?
Yeah, it should be approved by the audit committee, but while drafting the charter, typically the employee discusses with the management and the audit committee, but it is always the audit committee and the board, because this is a board appointed position. So your appointment is managed by the board, and so therefore it requires the board approval, and board audit committee actually approves the charter.
Or does it mean that twin approval is required? How do we?
No. You only discuss with the management and place it before the audit committee, and the audit committee actually approves. The authority and the responsibility is all decided by the audit committee, for the fundamental reason that functionally the audit committee head, the internal audit head, reports to the audit committee chair. Functionally.
Okay, fine, sir. We move to the second question from CA Mahadevi Chavan. Except company, in which areas internal audit requirements are there? Give me examples.
Sorry, Priyaji, can you please repeat?
The question is, probably the intention is to ask, other than companies, where are the internal audit requirements are posted?
Other than the Companies Act. So if I'm getting the answer correctly, so other than the Companies Act, where are the requirements posted? So it may depend on organization to organization, and or basically I should say it may depend on industry to industry. So there are certain aspects which the financials and me coming from a financial services industry, can safely say that there are many financial services regulators across the world. So again, if I talk about in India from RBI or SEBI, which may mandate that certain activities need to be monitored or overseen by the internal audit. So the requirement may flow not only from the Companies Act of any geography, but it may also flow from the regulators as well. So how we define or basically distinguish is statutory authorities in anything which is quite generic in nature. It may be Companies Act, labor laws, it may be fiscal laws, because those are generic and applicable equally to all the organizations and industries. Regulation, something which is very, very generic and specific to a particular industry. So RBI, SEBI for financial services, or DGCA may say something for civil aviation companies, or TRI may say something for the telecom companies. I hope that
venture capitalists may want an audit to be done. It's all need based, so there is no regulatory requirement. Well, the Companies Act defines a regulatory requirement for certain class of companies, but internal audit can be carried out by any organization if they want.
In that case, what is the extent of applicability of SIA? Would it still be applicable to all those?
Applicability. This is more a guide in terms of how you would approach an audit, what checks and balances you need to exercise when you conduct an internal audit. So right from your planning stage onwards, till the time you execute it and publish the report, all of that. So it only gives you a guidance in terms of how you should approach an internal audit, while it might make it mandatory for the applicable companies to make sure that you comply with these. It becomes mandatory, but it would become recommendatory for organizations where there is no mandate or a regulatory requirement for them to adopt and comply.
Fine, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
There's one more question from the same person. Internal audit and concurrent audit can both be conducted simultaneously for the same company?
Yes,
No.
of course.
No. So you're talking about external audit and internal audit to be done by the same organization?
Concurrent, sir.
Okay.
Internal audit and concurrent audit.
Oh, concurrent audit. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I thought it was stat audits. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Bharat. Yeah, you were saying something. Yeah, please go ahead.
Same thing, sir. I got so basically, so if it is internal audit and concurrent audit, definitely it can be done, but of course, the scope will be different. So say, for example, if I talk about any large bank operating in India, so the concurrent audit may have some specific scope, and the management may expect that all the branches are being audited, or basically the key branches are being audited, but then the scope will be very limited, and those concurrent audits will be focusing only those aspects within the particular branches. Or in very simple terms, you may call it a checklist-based audit. In many instances, there may be certain requirements which RBI may expect the concurrent audits to follow, but again, those will be considered by the concurrent audit, and I would expect that to be embedded into their checklist or into their audit program. However, for the same bank, there may be a top level internal audit function as well, which may be talking about various other aspects, because within the concurrent audit, you may be talking about the operational activities of a branch, but what about the HR? What about the payroll aspects of that branch? What about the information security? What about their physical security? What about their top level regulatory compliances? So those kind of stuff. So it may definitely be different. It may be done by the same organization, or different as well. But yes, as sir said, this is all clear. Stat and internal can't be by the same person.
Okay.
Typically, what happens, the concurrent audit can be part of your audit plan itself in case if it is decided right in the beginning. Now, who would perform can be decided either by the internal audit head or by the audit committee. So I think that's where typically it goes. And generally what happens is that, there are certain internal assessments which the management does it on its own. It is not necessary that they have to engage with the internal audit. They might engage an external audit firm or any other consulting firm that they want to get an assessment done. So I think, yeah, there are multiple models which are available, but what we need to understand is that internal audit is responsible to the board in discharging its duties and responsibilities, who is the primary stakeholder, because we functionally report to the board or the audit committee, and then we have a dotted line with the management, because they also have certain organizational responsibilities, for the simple reason that they actually design and put in place internal controls, and they are interested to know whether those are working effectively and whether they're designed appropriately. So that is the primary intention because of which the management is interested, because the management is responsible for implementing and putting in practice these internal controls. Internal controls means what? Policies, procedures, which we talked about in our presentations.
So technically, the scope of internal audit as well as concurrent audit both could be different. That's what can be concluded as.
Concurrent is something which you would do it on a cyclical basis. Now it could be every month, every quarter. Depending upon the terms of reference which have been agreed or given, it could be as Mr. Bharat rightly said, it can be done either by the internal audit team or by any other team when decided by the board or the management.
Okay. We move on to the next question from Sieh Subramani. Integrity, independence, ethics are now at premium. How do you enable IA staff to overcome issues relating to ethics?
See, typically what happens, at least in the in-house employment functions, we have code of ethics, which every member who is onboarded will have to sign. He or she goes through the internal training, and which we also make it very clear that in case if there are any conflict situations, in case if any of these conflict situations arise, then they need to check with the respective team leads or with the head of internal audit to get any clarifications. To presume that something is acceptable, doable is a crime. If in doubt, check, make sure that you reconfirm and get the requisite clarity. Otherwise, you should not go ahead and do it.
Okay. We have another question from Sieh Sudesh. Can you briefly explain about the independence requirements of internal auditor?
Mr. Bharat, you want to take that or?
Sir, yeah, please carry on.
See, typically what happens is that, when you might perform a certain task in an advisory role, you do not want, to end up auditing that particular area. You need to be independent of the area that you want to audit. So you need to have that arm's length distance maintained at all times. See, there are certain organizations where, as part of the internal audit, what we have done is, we participated in live audits. Now, what I mean by live audit is that there is probably a major IT infrastructure overhaul, or they are implementing a completely new IT landscape. Now, what the expectations of the management and the audit committee is that instead of actually going and doing an audit of that particular area after every year, identifying huge gaps and lapses, why don't you participate in the implementation activity itself? Do a running audit or a concurrent audit, as we may call. We call it as a live audit. And in case if there are any deficiencies, you immediately highlight it to the management or the implementation team so that you fix it. See, end of the day, remember one thing: the audit committee or the management is more interested in fixing the issue, because they are accountable for enhancing the shareholder value. So that's what, because they are in a fiduciary kind of a position. So they do not want an audit to be done only after something has been implemented. No. If you look at it from their point of view, what they say is that, whether you point it out at the point of implementation or at a subsequent date, it doesn't matter to them as long as they get highlighted and they get fixed. So they said that, in case if there's a critical project happening, then they want you to participate. But that is where you need to make sure that, you put on that independent hat or independence hat. You do not want to make sure that, you actively get involved in the implementation process to an extent that tomorrow you cannot even do an audit of that area because you have lost your independence. And this typically happens, I tell you where. We have seen a lot of organizations, including some of the large organizations that I've worked for. They engage a particular consulting firm. Let's say it could be any of these big fours. They come and implement, it could be either your BCP, or it could be your disaster, or it could be your information security, or even a risk management kind of a program. They come and implement it. Now, you cannot ask that same firm or the same partner fraternity to come and audit of the work that they have implemented. So typically what organizations say is that, they suggest a 1 year cooling off period. Even internal audits also, wherever we feel that, there could be a potential conflict or an independence issue, we make sure that, we do not do an audit of that area at least for a year as a safe period. And that is typically an acceptable yardstick. So for 1 year, we don't do an audit of that area, but the management or the audit committee is free to engage anybody else to do an assessment of that area. But post 1 year, we typically try to go in and do an audit. And this typically happens even where, for example, a particular firm A has been a stat auditor, and then now they are pitching in for internal audit work because they have completed their term. And even in those cases, what happens is that they have to have that cooling off period, and which typically runs for 12 months. Post which, they now can go ahead and take up the internal audit work. So these are the various scenarios, where you have these conflict of interest or independence issues which crop up. There are multiple scenarios. But these are some of the examples just to give you that clarity. So you need to take that call.
And Jeff, to add, in fact, building on what Sir just mentioned, so increasingly within our organization, we have been participating with the management in more of advisory capacity, because rather than doing a postmortem exercise once a particular, new system or new application or new target operating model has been implemented, and the auditor coming and identifying gaps, it's always good to advise on the go. So as Sir mentioned, so there have been multiple instances when for each of the key project there is one or the other internal audit spoke who will be associated with the project, who will sit on the steer course, and who will oversee over the overall project as an advisor. So there may be certain issues which may come over a period of time, which may be identified, but that doesn't mean, the person loses its independence. So what we have done is that if at any given point in time, if that particular, once the post implementation, that audit have to be performed over that target operating model or the application, so the planning document is very clear. So there is a conflict of interest policy which we follow. So it clearly specifies whether there is conflict of interest, and the person may say that, yes, I was associated, and of course, then we also apply that yardstick of 12 months cooling period. That's one. Secondly, we also see, if there are other people who are involved into the team. So there may be one person who spoke on a particular project, but when that post implementation audit is happening, there may be three people, right? And there may be a senior level reviewer. So that again mitigates to a large extent that independence issue. And most important, independence is a state of mind. So if an auditor feels that he may be, biased because he has been a part, or he has more, say for example, there may be a scenario that there is an internal transfer and somebody moving in from finance to, or information security to the internal audit team, then probably he or she, as a matter of good practice, or as a matter of, or overall because of their own integrity, should self declare and move out of that particular audit assignment. So it's more of a state of mind, and of course you can build some overall controls to mitigate these kind of risks.
That's what I said even in the presentation, that whenever you use the guest auditor program, you always make sure that, this risk is mitigated. I covered this as part of that program. So you actually get SMEs from the functional line to assist the internal audit team. But then you always make sure that, you mitigate the risk of independence, so that, typically nobody would like to point issues in the area in which they have been, they are responsible or monitoring or managing that area. So, you do not want to get into that situation, because there will be a lot of questions. I tell you, most of the times, these are the questions which come up from the audit committee in terms of how do you know that you have covered all the risks? How do you know that, you have not left out something intentionally? So, you don't want to get into a situation where, you will have to prove that, you are truly independent and put on that independent ad. And therefore, as Mr. Bharat rightly said, and typically as part of your, working model, you make sure that, you don't get into these areas, even if there is an iota of doubt, and then you have the cooling off period of 12 months as a standard practice.
Can we summarize that while preparing the audit planning at that stage itself, can I have certain vital areas on these independence issues to be handled?
No, as part of your internal audit manual itself, because it's a ways of working. What engagement you should pick up, what engagement you should not pick up, what is it that you can include as part of your plan, what you should not include as part of the plan, or wherever you think that the audit committee says, I want this to be reviewed, as Mr. Bharat rightly said, a lot of these post-implementation reviews typically go through this phase. So that is when you need to put up your hand and say that, I think the internal team probably has a potential independence issue, and therefore we recommend engaging an external consultant. That's okay, because you cannot influence an external consultant, and that's an independent report. Then typically what we do is that, we let the consultant come and make the presentation themselves, answer the questions. So to that extent, you ensure that, you mitigate the risk of independence. You do not want to be actively involved either in the presentation, or preparing the report, or submitting the report, or sharing the presentation with the audit committee or with the management.
Is there a periodicity of reviewing the internal audit manual?
See, typically it should be done every year if you think there is a need. For example, your ways of working has changed. You have introduced a new tool, because of which, instead of doing a sampling, you are working on 100% sampling. Instead of on the 100% of the population, or you have started implementing bots, then your entire working methodology undergoes a change. How the bots, then what happens is that who will audit the bot? What should be the periodicity of auditing the bot? How do you ensure that the results thrown by the audit are reliable, complete, and accurate? So, these are the questions. Then these are the add-on things, that checks and balances that you will have. So the methodology is a living document. So if your working practices undergo a change, then the methodology also will have to go through that change, to the extent you make sure that you cover all the tracks. Rather than you're only looking at the output without even realizing. See, this is one of the bigger problems when you do the data analytics. Most times I call them as paratroopers. So you literally jump in the middle of the field, and then you consume whatever data has been provided to you, without even validate that data is even accurate, complete, and reliable. That's the biggest gap that I see with the internal audit professionals. See, we all jump into the tools, we extract data, we perform analytics. But then the problem is that how do you know that data is complete? How do you know that the data is accurate and complete and relevant? So that those checks will have to be carried out before you even start working on the data. So those are the things that you typically cover as part of your manual, and then you are very specific in terms of what checks need to be carried out. So manual is not generic. You need to specify very clearly what checks that you need to carry out, to check the validity of the data or the accuracy of the data or the completeness of the data. What need to be done. Similarly, when you engage, use bots or any of these tools, then what checks and balances need to be put in place. So those things, you keep on adding it, and then you keep on enriching it, so that at any point in time, whosoever reads it, that version becomes relevant for that particular point in time.
Sharmaji and Bharatji, all your discussions have been engaging us so much that we have not even seen the time. It is almost 8:15 by now. Thank you, sir. I feel very honored and overwhelmed to render the vote of thanks today. I, on behalf of the Internal Audit Committee of ICAI and Chengalpattu District Branch of SARC of ICAI, raise up to present the vote of thanks today. I thank Shri Nandaji, Chairman, Internal Audit Standards Board, ICAI, for providing us approval to our branch for hosting this wonderful program. I also thank Shri Sieh Gyanji, Vice Chairman, Internal Audit Standard Board, to be present with us today. Mainly thank the speakers who have been engaging us throughout the program, Shri Sharmaji and Shri Bharatji, who have shared their knowledge and expertise with all of us today. I also thank the whole team members of the Internal Audit Standard Board, Delhi, who've been really guiding us and coordinating with us throughout and supporting us in making the program a grand success. I convey my sincere thanks to the management committee members of the Chengalpattu District Branch of SARC of ICAI in Chennai for their support. I also place on record my heartful happiness and thanks to all the participants who are instrumental in making this program a grand success. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Priyaji. Thank you, sir, the Chengalpattu branch chairman. Sorry, my sincere apologies for missing out the name. We are overwhelmed for this opportunity. Yeah, thank you, sir. So, and feel free to reach out to us in case if there are any further questions, anything. We'll be more than happy to revert either on an email or WhatsApp. So we'll be more than happy to revert. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ICAI, to Nandaji, to Gyanji, and to everyone. So it truly was an enriching experience for me as well. So you keep learning, so thank you, Bharatji, for those insightful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was very insightful. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.